business news, we're news for business people.
Hello and welcome. My name is Ayush Alavadi and you're watching Primetime. Let's have a look at today's headlines. A public rift in the Supreme Court plunges India into a judicial crisis. 4 senior Supreme Court judges question the Chief Justice's decisions to selectively assign matters of national importance to certain judges. India's industrial output grows at the fastest pace in 19 months, rises 8.4% in November, driven by a pickup in manufacturing. Retail inflation breaches the 5% mark in December. One-time tax boost lift Infosys is a third quarter profit. The IT major leaves its full-year revenue guidance unchanged at 5.5 to 6.5%. Indian markets rise for the 6th straight week. Nifty closes just short of 10,700. Brent crude steadies after briefly climbing above $70 a barrel for the first time in 3 years as a global surplus recedes. Well, let's start with our top story. 4 senior Supreme Court judges today publicly criticized Chief Justice of India Deepak Mishra, an unprecedented situation that threatens to undermine the top court's credibility. The 4 judges, Justice Chelameshwar, Justice Ranjan Gogoi, Justice Madan Lokur, Justice Kurian Joseph, have raised questions regarding the allocation of cases and the lack of finalization of the memorandum of procedure. The judges said they were forced to make their views public as they had no choice but to communicate their grievances to the nation. Here are some of the highlights from the unprecedented decision. All right, we're also joined on the phone line by K.K. Venugopal, Attorney General of India, and we're also joined in the studio by our Managing Editor, Menika Doshi.
Thank you very much, Ayush. I think the first question I'd like to put to Mr. Venugopal, after thanking him for joining us this evening, which is what I imagine the conclusion to a very tumultuous day. Mr. Venugopal, what are we to make of the events of the day as ordinary citizens and journalists? Are we to appreciate that, the opacity of the Supreme Court today has been cracked, that transparency has been brought in because judges are now finally, or the nation has a glimpse into the goings-on of the Supreme Court? Or are we to worry that there is this big shadow of doubt that has been cast upon this most important institution?
I don't think that there is a crisis. I don't think one should elevate this to a level where one would affect the confidence that the litigant public has in this institution, for the simple reason that it would have been far more appropriate, according to me, if the judges had placed all these matters before the full court. And the full court today would be about 26 judges or so, because 4 or 5 judges are is vacant. There are vacancies. Now, if that was done, the whole thing would have been done quietly, resolved by a majority, and that would have been the end of the matter. Now, the television channels are examining each little thing with great intensity, and all this is going to affect the litigant public's confidence in this institution. And therefore, I think that because the judges are persons who are statesmen and persons of wisdom and experience, I have no doubt that they will try to put the institution above everything else. And they will patch up, they will settle the whole thing, and within the next 2 days, everything will be settled. Okay?
Well, sir, no, but I can only assume, Mr. Venugopal, please do allow me to put in a quick question.
Only one more question.
All right, only one more question. I can only assume that the 4 judges who did go public to air their grievances today, the 4 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court after the Chief Justice, one of whom could potentially be next in line for the next Chief Justice, all 4 members of the collegium would have only taken as extreme an action as this if their backs were against the wall, if other efforts had failed.
No, but
therefore
don't
I
you-
ask that whatever you have outlined as the best way to have resolved this situation, probably that was no longer an option in front of them. What happens
No,
now?
but then they should very well have explained as to why they are not following the normal procedure of asking for a full court meeting and placing these matters and then having a majority decision. Now, how can four decide all this and place it in the public domain when there are another 20 judges or so? Therefore, all that I say is these are all persons of great integrity, all these four judges. They are persons who are very well-meaning, but I still feel that they could have opted or adopted an alternative. And the alternative is what I have said. Thank you.
Will you allow me to put in one? All right. That was K.K. Venugopal, the Attorney General of the country. We are also joined now by Senior Advocate Soli Sorabji. Mr. Sorabji joins us, I think, right after a quick flight out of Delhi and coming into Mumbai. We're grateful that you found the time to speak with us, Mr. Sorabji, this evening. I'm sure you are as distressed with the events that have occurred at the Supreme Court as the rest of us are. Before I ask you more detailed questions, please share with us your first impression of what impact you think this is going to have on that very important judicial institution.
Yes, not a very good impact at all. The public image of the judiciary will definitely be affected. And after all, this is not a question of majority, minority shareholders. Even assuming the other judges have a point of view, they can't call a press conference. This is not done. They're judges of the Supreme Court, and they should behave in a manner which doesn't affect the image of the institution in the eye of the public. I'm very distressed at what has happened. And as I said, maybe they have a point of view, but that's not a way to go about it. I mean, you can't do like that and attack the Chief Justice in this fashion. I'm very, very unhappy at what has happened.
Mr. Sorabji, let me put to you exactly the same point that I just put to the Attorney General of India, and which is that these are four senior-most judges of the Supreme Court after the Chief Justice of India. Together, the five comprise of the collegium who appoint judges to the rest of the higher judiciary. Would you think that these four judges would have taken as extreme an action as they have today unless they thought that their backs were to the wall, unless they thought that all other efforts had failed, unless they thought that the only way to resolve this was to air dirty laundry in public?
No, I don't agree. To go to utter in public is not the way to resolve it. You can still have made an effort to meet the chief, talk with him, discuss with him, dialogue. Look, as I told you, this is not a case of a company that are majority and minority shareholders. Judges don't hold a press conference to air the differences with other members of the judiciary, especially about the Chief Justice. That's a very, very undesirable thing which has happened, and I, for one, am very unhappy about it.
Okay, if I may put it this way, Mr. Sorabji, the other concern I had was, as I was reading the letter that these four judges released to the media.
Sorry?
As I was reading the letter that these four judges released to the media, this was the letter that they had written to the Chief Justice. In that letter, I could find no specific detail as to what may have prompted their impression or conclusion that there was, unfairness being meted out or selectiveness being meted out in the allocation of cases in the Supreme Court. And yet, many senior counsels say that for the last several months, this has been the talking point in the Supreme Court. What do you speak, or what would you say of this allocation procedure that is currently at the heart of this controversy?
No, I really don't know about how correct these allegations are. But the question is there, as I told you, I assume they have a point of view. Assume they have some grievance against the Chief Justice. I'm very much opposed to the manner of their doing it. After all, the Supreme Court judges, if they go on this way, what will the public think? And after all, the whole idea of public perception is very important. And that's what really is the main factor about which conduces to the independence of the judiciary. I'm sorry, but I think this is something which should not have been done. And I'm sorry it's done. Okay.
How can this be fixed, Mr. Sarabji? What needs to be
Sorry?
done? Because I would hate to ask you if the executive should interfere. That is the last solution this problem requires. What needs to be done to make this this problem go away, or can it ever go away? Because today there was a question put to the 4 judges in the morning in the press conference on whether the Chief Justice should be impeached, and one of the judges said that's for the nation to decide. And then later on in the afternoon we heard a comment by a retired judge who said that these 4 judges should be impeached. We are now speaking of impeachment in casual terms in this country.
No question of impeachment. That's out of the question. I don't know. But that's exactly what happens. When these things happen and people come out with all sorts of comments and all sorts of so-called solutions, and that detracts from the authority of the Supreme Court, the final court in our country. I think these judges should have really thought 100 times before they had the press conference.
What do you think can be done now to resolve this?
Well, what can be done now is let better counsel prevail. Let there be a better atmosphere of understanding. Meet the chief. He is the head of the judiciary, of course, the first among equals, but sort it out. Sort it out in a good spirit of understanding and give and take. They must set an example. Judges can't behave like shareholders in a public limited company.
Mr. Sarabji, we have often in the past discussed the NJAC system versus the collegium. We've discussed what it means to have the executive play a role in the appointment of judges, or a larger role, if I may call it that. Do you believe that this disunity in the Supreme Court, this friction, this fracture, opens the door for more external interference? Will it undermine the independence of the institution?
Well, not undermine, not the executive will do anything about it. I suppose the executive standard is a matter for the judges. Government has no role to play in this. Judges should sort it out themselves. And I hope they do it. Okay, dear. Bye.
All right, Mr. Sarabji, we'll leave it there. You know, it's been such a tumultuous day, Ayush, and I know that you were about to introduce the comments of the judges from the afternoon when we were, you know, when we finally did get Mr. Venugopal on the line, and we didn't want to delay that. Do you want to be able to brief our viewers quickly on some of the sequence of events, if at all?
No, absolutely, and I want you to stick on with us, because I'd like your take as well, because you've been tracking this all day, Menika. But let's actually, play out some of the reactions from members of the bar all throughout the day, and we'll also get you some other reactions following that.
Well, it looks like we've thrown the production room into a bit of a tizzy.
Fair enough.
But
I think it's all timely, Menika, because this is something I've been wanting to ask you. Unprecedented when it comes to what happened today. We've always heard of how members of the bar have been divided on these sort of issues. Now we know it's members of the bench as well. It seems like there has been some sort of infighting. Would you really say that, you know, this does to a great extent dent the image of the judiciary, and certainly, well, points towards bigger problems that exist in the Indian judicial system?
So I'll be careful with my words. I think there has been a lot of judiciary judge bashing through the course of the day today on all sides. And, you know, sometimes it's just better to sit and observe and maybe ponder over what are the questions the events of the day throw up. I think so far, Ayush, we've heard only one side of the story, and that is the side of the 4 judges. There was a rumor in the afternoon that the Chief Justice of India would speak to the press, but he chose not to go public with his point of view. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if he did it on the instructions of something, or he just believed that, so what if one side has spoken? I must maintain, you know, that tradition of silence in this institution. So we've heard only one side of the story. Besides that, I think Mr. Venugopal pointed this out, as did Mr. Sorabji, that where do the other judges of the Supreme Court stand? So far, we know that we know where the top 5 judges stand. We know that the next 4 are versus the topmost 1. But what happens to the remaining 20, 21 judges of the Supreme Court? Do they stand on the side of the 4? Are they united in believing that there has been selective allocation of cases? Are they united in believing that the administration of the court has not been up to par? Are they united in believing that there has been a delay in the decision-making of the memorandum of procedure?
Yeah.
We don't know where they stand. We don't know whether they believe that things were fine. We don't know whether this is just the view of the 4 senior-most judges. We don't know whether the remaining 21 judges actually agree with it or not. And therefore, we still don't know whether it is about differences between one group and another or genuine administrative issues in the Supreme Court, right?
But Menika, since you mentioned it's these 4 judges, and perhaps that's why they've grabbed the headlines, considering this is the collegium. Well, four members of the collegium, which for the last 2 years, for the last 3 years, for the longest time has been grabbing the headlines about this NJAC versus collegium debate.
Of course. And I don't take away from the seniority. I don't take away from the gravity. In fact, Justice Gogoi could very well be the next in line
Absolutely.
of the Chief Justice. I'm not taking away from any of that. All I'm saying is that the Supreme Court is not just 5 judges. The Supreme Court is many, many more judges.
Absolutely.
We don't know where the rest stand. And because we don't know whether to make this out to be a set of differences between the Chief Justice and a certain senior group of judges, or the Chief Justice and many of the other judges who also believe that there are administrative issues. So I'm just pointing out what we still don't know. And it's important to say that before everybody jumps to conclusions and decides who is the villain in this entire piece. So that's point number 2, right? Point number 3 is, you asked me, what does this mean for the institution? Of course, this is a serious dent to the institution. All through the day, we've been listening, to lawyers, to senior counsel, one half of whom are saying, this is horrible. Why are the judges airing their grievances in public? This is against the tradition of the Supreme Court. Why can't they settle it amongst themselves? And we've got the other half who are saying, this is great. This is great for transparency. The Supreme Court for too long has remained this opaque institution, opaque about its procedures, its habits, etc. And we need it for this to happen. We've got a group of people who are saying down with the Chief Justice of India, another group saying down with these 4 judges.
Right.
Effectively, what we've done is we've opened the door now for anyone and everyone to criticize the most important, or one of the 3-4 most important institutions in this country, and that's the Supreme Court of India. What faith can the ordinary person now have in the integrity of the judges if everybody in the country, including the judges themselves, are pointing fingers at each other? And let's not forget, I know for the longest time we believe that the Supreme Court is not final because it's right, but it's right because it's final.
Right.
But if you lose that sense of authority, then why would a country believe in your finality? Why would ordinary people believe in your finality? I think today you may have opened the window or the door to sunlight, but you've also allowed a bunch of other things to start coming in through that door, and we really don't know where that's going to end.
Right, Menika, really appreciate you joining us with all those insights and comments, and of course for those 2 fascinating chats with the current Attorney General, K.K. Venugopal, and the former Attorney General and Senior Counsel, Soli Sorabji. Well, staying with the subject, the Congress party said the concerns raised by the 4 judges are very serious and need to be investigated. Arpan Chaturvedi, who tracked the developments, joins us with more. Arpan?
That's right, Ayush. So just moments back, the Congress President Rahul Gandhi himself came for the briefing and addressed and made a statement. Remember, this briefing or the statement of Mr. Rahul Gandhi comes after there was a meeting of top senior lawyers and Congress leaders like Mr. Kapil Sibal, Mr. Manish Tiwari, Mr. Salman Khurshid and Mr. P. Chidambaram. After that, the Congress party came and said basically some of the points that were raised in the press conference in the morning. If you remember, Justice Chelameshwar saying that 20 years down the line, we don't want people to think that we sold our souls, like pretty strong statements. Again, Justice Gogoi said that what they are doing today is to discharge their debt to the nation, and that it is important what they are doing for the betterment of the democracy in this country. So the Congress statement was also saying that it's a very serious issue that the 4 judges have raised, and they specifically mentioned the Judge Loya's case, which was heard in the Apex Court today, the PIL, which is seeking an independent probe into the death of Judge Loya. The Congress president himself made a statement to that and said that the full court should meet to resolve this issue, as well as there should be a serious investigation led by the topmost of the Supreme Court into this case of Judge Loya. Let's listen in what the Congress President Rahul Gandhi had to say on this development that happened in the Supreme Court today.
The points that have been raised by the 4 judges are extremely important. they have mentioned that there is a threat to democracy. I think it needs to be looked into. It needs to be looked into carefully. They've also made a point about Judge Loya's case. I think that is also something that needs to be investigated properly. It needs to be looked at from the highest levels of the Supreme Court.
Well, on Primetime Debate, we will speak to senior advocates at the Supreme Court, Raju Ramachandran, and senior advocate at the Supreme Court, Dushyant Dave, to understand the implications of all these developments that have actually taken place today. Well, mixed news on the macro front. Industrial production growth surged to a 19-month high in November, though inflation inched higher, with retail inflation surging to 5.2% in December. These are the final macro data points that Finance Minister Arun Jaitley will have to consider while he prepares the union budget. What can we make of these latest data points? Ira Dugal has this report.
Interesting turn in the economic data released this Friday evening. Much stronger than expected numbers from industrial output and consumer price inflation rising along expected lines. The industrial output numbers stole the show at 8.4% growth in industrial output, much higher than the 4.4 that was being forecast, and a nice spurt up from the October number, which was revised down to 2%. And if you look into what is actually building into this IIP number, it's manufacturing all the way. 10.2% growth in manufacturing, mining weakish at about 1.1% growth, and electricity at under 4% is also relatively subdued, but mining definitely looking extremely strong. If you look at the use-based classification, capital goods have risen 9.4%, and infrastructure and construction, a new category created in the new IIP series, is up 13.5%. So it does look like, if you look at last month's numbers and this month's numbers, there is some pickup in manufacturing activity on the ground. This pickup is also being told in the PMI numbers. PMI numbers in November and in December in particular were higher, and should the IIP numbers mirror the strength in PMI, perhaps we could see the strength in industrial output sustain. We say perhaps because the IIP doesn't always mirror PMI, which is a survey-based indicator, in contrast to IIP, which is an output-based indicator. Not to say that there are no distortions in the IIP number. There always are. In this cycle, it's been the digestive and enzyme segment which has been creating distortions. That segment saw a 110% jump in output and added about 2.5 percentage point to the index. You also had, apart from that though, other segments which sort of tell the story of manufacturing, such as parts of trucks and lorries, which saw nearly 200% spurt, axles up almost 62%. So essentially saying that there is some evidence, at least based on this data, of strength in the manufacturing sector. Whether it sustains or not, we'll wait and see, and perhaps based on the PMI numbers, it may. The consumer price inflation numbers told a story which was not unanticipated. Inflation at above 5% now, 5.2%, strengthening from 4.88% in the previous month. The headline number is being pushed higher by categories like vegetables, which are up almost 30% year on year. On a month-on-month basis, though, vegetable prices have cooled off. Pulses continues to be in a down cycle, so the year-on-year number is negative. Even the month-on-month number for pulses is negative. But overall, the food and beverage category saw inflation of 4.85% compared to 4.4% in the previous month. If you look at the core numbers, there are actually slightly divergent trend in the core categories. So categories like clothing and footwear, for instance, have seen lower year-on-year inflation this month compared to last month. But housing has seen a pickup in inflation to 8.25% compared to 7.36%. This is the impact of the house rent allowance partly playing in. So to that extent, it is a little bit technical. And of course, fuel and light inflation is at nearly 8% because of the higher fuel and commodity prices that we are seeing globally. But if you take the two indicators together, I think the message is fairly clear that this part of the economic cycle is going to once again be dominated by inflation concerns, leaving very little room for the Reserve Bank of India, or actually no room for the Reserve Bank of India to cut interest rates. One hopes that this pickup in inflation comes with a pickup in growth, because if growth continues to be subdued and inflation starts to rise, then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Well, Aditi Nair, senior economist, ICRA, joined us on the phone line. Aditi, thanks so much for joining us. As Ira was mentioning, with these concerns with inflation and subdued growth, it's like you're stuck between rock and a hard place. Does this IIP data suggest that there may be a real pickup in the economy from here on?
See, we were definitely expecting there to be an uptick in the IIP at about 5.7%. So the number which has come out has been significantly higher than our expectation, which I think was actually the highest amongst all of the forecasts that the economists had put out. So a significant uptick over here. A couple of reasons, of course, for manufacturing, there was a favorable base effect, and that is one of the reasons that's pushed up growth to this extent sequentially. And also, I think we have to, keep in mind that this is a month after the festive season has come to an end. So to some extent, there is an inventory restocking that would have taken place. In any case, over the last few months, inventories have been on the lower side after the transition to GST. So I think this is one of the supportive factors. But that is something that may not really sustain going forward. The favorable base effect will continue to play a part in keeping volume growth high. We're already seeing a sharp increase in the monthly growth in terms of sectors like auto production, where the growth in December was somewhere around 35%. But to the extent that is being driven by inventory rebuilding, I think that is something that may continue in Q3, but may taper off in Q4, even though the favorable base effect would continue. We are hopeful that we will continue to see an improvement in the GVA growth in Q3 and in Q4. Based on today's higher than expected IIP growth number, we may upwardly revise our Q3 GVA growth projections, but I don't think we're going to revise our Q4 projections based on these numbers, because I think to the extent that it's inventory rebuilding that has led to this improvement, that may not sustain going forward.
Aditi, specifically on inflation, looking at the CPI inflation trajectory since June, we've seen has been on the rise. Some would say it's perhaps peaked now in this particular month. I want to understand what you make of this pickup inflation. Is it worrisome according to you?
So the inflation number has definitely come in higher than our projection. We had expected it to remain flattish around 4.8, 4.9% and significantly higher than what we had built in. The main reason for that is that the housing inflation index, or the index number for housing itself, has actually gone up by more than what we had penciled in. And that's good news and bad news. Bad news is that, housing inflation, now that we've seen this uptick, it's likely to remain pretty persistent over the next few months until the base effect of the HRA revision kicks in after July. Having said that, we do expect that the MPC will see through or look through the jump in inflation that's coming in from the housing side, because part of it is technical because of the HRA impact. Fuel prices have gone up further, so that's obviously a risk, more so for WPI than for CPI. And on the food side, the base effect, which has been unfavorable so far, would turn from next month onwards. And the continued correction, the seasonal correction that has been delayed this year in vegetable prices, once that kicks in as well, at least the food and beverages trajectory should start moving downward now. In terms of today's inflation number, I think that's going to be a temporary peak. Over Q4, we are still penciling in some mild reductions in the CPI inflation, and then a couple of peaks after that in Q1 of next year, before the base effects start to really bring CPI inflation back significantly lower than 5%. So a bit of a mixed trend, but definitely next 6 readings would remain on the higher side, so some amount of concern over there. If the RBI or the MPC choose to see through the housing impact, then I think we can, expect there to be a pause as far as rate action is concerned. But if not, then perhaps, I don't know if we'll be looking at a rate hike sooner rather than later.
Right, that also answers my next question about the rate hike. Thanks so much for those insights. Now, moving on, Infosys surpassed its profit growth estimates in Q3 thanks to a one-time tax benefit in the US and rise in growth on the back of adoption of digital services. Net profit grew by 37.7% to 5,130 crore rupees. Revenue in rupee terms rose by 1.3% to 17,849 crore rupees, while dollar revenue rose by nearly 1% to $2,755 million, in line with estimates. EBIT rose by 1.7% to 4,319 crore rupees, while EBIT margin grew marginally. Infosys has maintained its US dollar sales growth forecast at 6.5 to 7.5%. The company also maintained its full-year revenue guidance in constant currency terms at 5.5 to 6.5%, but cut its FY18 rupee sales growth forecast to 2.1 to 3.1% from 3 to 4% earlier. Now, this is the first earnings announcement since Salil Parekh took over as CEO last week. Salil Parekh said that his immediate challenge will be to connect clients and employees.
There's work on what is the market opportunity. There's work on our client relationships. The people dimension is very critical. And then there's work on how is the service portfolio rejuvenated. So those are the real elements that we are digging into. And from that, with interactions with our clients, with employees, with our partners, over the next 2 or 3 months, I will complete the exercise. Our focus today is to make sure that as we grow into the new areas, we offer the opportunity for reskilling for all of our employees. Beyond that, we have in all of our operating metrics already shown a high level of utilization. We have a real strong demand in the market.
Well, joining us on the show is Ravi Menon, research analyst at Elara Capital. Ravi, really appreciate you joining us on Bloomberg Quinn. Now, I want to understand what you really make of these numbers and, of course, the guidance offered by the company.
So I think that the real surprise was them maintaining the guidance. Except for that, the results were pretty much in line with our expectations, maybe slightly below, but not too far below. So maintaining the guidance has meant that the implied Q4 guidance is a very broad range, minus 0.6% to 3.1%. It's a very broad range. So I think they just, after revising the guidance last quarter, they just didn't want to make another revision, and that was it. I don't think that people are expecting them to hit either the lower end or the top end of that guidance.
Right, Ravi, BFSI has been lackluster for both Infi and TCS. What have you made from the management commentary about revival in this particular vertical?
I think that it is important to note what Mohit Joshi has said. He spoke of a rotation from compliance and regulatory-oriented spend towards more spending on digital. And they also said that because of that, we should see an uptick in spending. And there are some pockets that he said where they had seen some cutbacks a year and a half back, like among asset management firms, and how he sees that picking up now. So overall, the Infosys management seemed quite confident about BFS spend, and the TCS management was very positive about the insurance side, given their deal pipeline. So I think overall the environment is looking up, and actually Mohit Joshi said precisely that the environment, the sentiment among banks overall, whether they're regional banks or larger banks, it is starting to look better.
Ravi, based on the traction that you see, especially in the US and European markets, I wanted to ask you if you think the company can guide better than what they have for the current financial year.
See, I think that, to start off with a conservative guidance, they might want to even retain what they have given for this year, because you never know, what's there out there in the macro over the one full year. We've seen the last year bring a few surprises, so you don't want to put yourself too far out there. But the environment is decidedly better, so they might want to give a slightly better guidance. But I think that we shouldn't expect very aggressive guidance going into next year, especially given it's the first year that Salil will be at the helm, and Infosys should be undergoing a lot of changes.
Well, Ravi, really appreciate you joining us on Primetime. Thanks so much. Well, moving on, Indian markets scaled record highs today. Both the Nifty and the Sensex clocked gains over 0.25%. ICICI Bank, Reliance Industries and HDFC led the rally. On a weekly basis, both the benchmarks gained for the 6th consecutive week. Neeraj Shah sums up the week's market action in this report.
Well, when you're nudging new highs or beating them or eclipsing them, you never question the move if you're a bull. And I think bulls won't question what happened this week, even though it was 1.5% or 1.25% kind of a move on the large caps or on the mid caps, if you see. Save for Friday's trade, I think mid caps did much better. The small caps actually outperformed, so you don't question such moves. What went well, what didn't? Let's talk about some of the movers. Surprise, surprise, Coal India was one of the principal performers. I think the price hikes impact came into play and it beat everybody else or all the other gainers by a wide margin. However, not too far behind were the tech majors. Even though the numbers but declared by TCS and Infosys were bang on in line with estimates, the stocks did well. Infosys 6.5, Tech Mahindra 4.5. I think the others too across the board, large cap IT at least in particular, did a very, very well for themselves. What didn't do well were the telcos. So the Jio fare cut, which happened the previous weekend, but the impact was felt this week, led to Bharti, Airtel and Idea correcting quite a bit. 5.5 to 6% is no mean feat. So both of these stocks corrected quite a bit in the session. There's this whole merger buzz between IDFC Bank and Capital First. We at Bloomberg Quint have no direct knowledge. The management of Capital First has said that evaluating various possibilities but can't comment, but it certainly led to the stocks doing well. So Capital First moving up 15%, IDFC Bank doing an encore too, about 15.8 or 16%. So good going for both of these. And we saw some uptick in crude, and therefore all the crude related names did well. Forget the upstream names like ONGC and Reliance, but look at the others. Aban Offshore 22%, Alpha Geo 5%, a couple of other names too, smaller names, did reasonably well for themselves in this week gone by. That aside, I think top gainers included Uttam Galva after a really long slumber of probably a year and a quarter. Cafe Coffee Day woke up and 28%, zooming past its issue price for the first time. So this one did okay for itself as well. There were a couple of losers like Fortis really, which came off in the session, and some high flyers which corrected a bit, the likes of GMR. But by and large, not a bad week for the equity markets.
Well, crude prices have eased from 3-year peaks reached yesterday and are still trading near record levels, though there are warnings of a downward price correction. Overall, market conditions remain strong due to the ongoing OPEC-led production cuts. NYMEX crude is trading above $63.5 a barrel, while Brent is trading a notch above $69 a barrel. But how much of an impact does this price rise have on an Indian fuel consumer? Somit Sarkar brings you this analysis.
So if you see in this chart, the pink line is the Brent crude prices, the blue line is the petrol prices, and the orange line is the diesel prices. In the last 6 months, you can clearly see how the Brent crude has moved up. It has moved up from $47 per barrel to nearly $69 per barrel. And in the same period, petrol prices have moved up from 68 rupees per litre to nearly 74 rupees per litre, and diesel prices from 57 rupees per litre to 63 rupees per litre. So in short, in the last 6 months, the Brent crude has risen nearly 45%. And the retail petrol and diesel prices in a deregulated market and in a daily pricing market have just moved up by 9% and 11%. So let's see why they have moved up so slowly. Now in the last 6 months, rupee has appreciated. Now rupee has appreciated by nearly 1.3%, which has worked in favor because rupee appreciation means you need to spend less rupee to purchase a barrel of crude. Also in the last 6 months, the government has lowered its income. Now government has cut its excise duty on every litre of fuel, that is petrol and diesel, by 2 rupees, and this announcement came in October 3rd. Now along with the government, it was the oil marketing companies, that is HPCL, BPCL and IOCL, who have also taken a hit on their marketing margins. Now they have cut on their own income by lowering the marketing margins. In July 2017, on every litre of diesel and petrol, an oil marketing company was earning around 3.6 rupees and 3.3 rupees as gross marketing margin, which in December came down to as low as rupees 1 on both. Now a slower oil demand was also one of the reasons. Now, you can see in this chart clearly, in 2015 and 2016, the petrol and diesel consumption in India grew by around 7% each. But in the year 2017, it grew by only 4%. So the oil demand, the growth in oil demand has come up from 7% in 2015 and 2016 to 4% in 2017.
Now, in other news, a Tanzanian probe has found that the local unit of Bharti Airtel was transferred from the state illegally. The government will now begin talks to retake what it says is its rightful share in the business. The investigation found that the initial privatization of Tanzania Telecommunications broke the law, regulations and due procedure. Finance Minister of Tanzania, Philip Mpango, said that the country was conned and a lot of money was lost. Remember last month, Airtel said that its 2010 acquisition of a 60% stake in Zain was in full compliance. Tanzania's ownership claim follows an order by the government last year that telecommunications companies should sell at least a quarter of their units on the local bourses to boost domestic ownership. The Indian Space Research Organization has successfully launched its 100th satellite from Sriharikota and in Andhra Pradesh today. A jubilant ISRO chairman, A.S. Kiran Kumar, announced that the Cartosat 2 series satellite, the 7th in the series, a nano satellite and 28 commercial payloads, was successfully injected into the orbit one by one by the PSLV C-40. According to ISRO, the Cartosat 2 series satellite launch is a follow-on mission with the primary objective of providing high-resolution scene-specific spot imageries. Well, what's happening with Bitcoin? It steadied today after 4 days of losses amidst increasing scrutiny from regulators around the world. Bitcoin is little changed on the day, as you can see on your screens, and is trading above $13,500. The world's largest cryptocurrency was down as much as 23% for the week at one point, on track for the deepest decrease since January 2015. According to Bloomberg Composite Pricing, and is now down about 20% for the week. Among the blows to cryptocurrencies this week was the South Korean Justice Minister's reiteration of a proposal to ban local cryptocurrency exchanges. Meanwhile, Bitcoin mining, the process needed to facilitate transactions, is set to become more expensive as China's government cracks down on the industry. In the US, scrutiny is set to increase amidst concerns about the potential use of cryptocurrencies for fraudulent purposes such as money laundering. Well, US President Donald Trump has cancelled his visit to the UK. The visit, which was planned for next month, was officially to launch a new US embassy. However, Donald Trump has blamed the bad deal struck by the Obama administration to relocate the base from central London to an off location. In a tweet, Trump explained the reason for cancelling his visit and hit out at the Obama administration. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will now launch the new embassy. Not done with the US president yet. Trump has sparked a new race row at an immigration meeting in the White House. Trump reportedly said that the US should stop admitting immigrants from Haiti and El Salvador and instead bring in more people from Norway. Remember, Trump met with Norway Prime Minister on Wednesday. Amidst the rising geopolitical concerns in the Korean Peninsula over North Korea's nuclear capabilities, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un won this match in the contest to acquire nuclear weapons. Putin called Kim an educated and mature politician in a meeting with Russian editors-in-chief in Moscow yesterday. He said the North Korean ruler had succeeded in developing a nuclear warhead capable of hitting any target. Putin's unusually warm words for Kim Jong-un came after North and South Korean officials held their first direct talks in more than 2 years earlier this week. Meanwhile, Donald Trump also expressed hope that the crisis with Kim's regime would be resolved without war. German politicians have achieved a breakthrough in talks aimed at forming a new coalition government. This paves the way for formal coalition talks between Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats and their former coalition partners, the Social Democrats. The talks focused on differences over tax and migration. The alliance has been unable to form a government since inconclusive elections in September. It is Germany's longest ever post-war period of coalition building. The two parties were in alliance for 4 years. What took them so long to reach a breakthrough, though? Burjit Jenin of Bloomberg News sums up the reasons in this report.
They have been governing for 4 years, but in between there was this election and there has been the refugee crisis. And now both sides are saying this can't go on, we have to change policy. But both sides are saying the different things. One, the SPD wants to turn the country more towards the left, more towards social policy, and in particular the CSU, the Merkel's Christian Social Party in Bavaria, they want to turn it more towards the right. They want to be more anti-immigration. So there is a general battle where this country is going to go, and it's not going to go more into the same direction.
All right, Oprah's speech at the Golden Globes did win hearts on Twitter and all over social media, but there's a lot more that went viral this week on the internet. Take a look.
Oprah's hugs could end worse, solve world peace.
So I want all the girls watching here now to know that a new day is on the horizon. Fighting hard to make sure that they become the leaders who take us to the time when nobody ever has to say, "Me too," again. Thank you.
On Primetime Debate, we will be talking about Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's six-day India visit, which starts on Sunday. Is it more than just a state visit? And what will be next for Indo-Israel ties? To understand that, we will speak to Raj Bhalla, professor at University of Kansas, and Bharat Karnad, professor at Center for Policy Research. But on this show, that's about all the time we have. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned to Bloomberg Quint.